The Australia Together podcast is brought to you by Australian Community Futures Planning, Australia's first community-based research and planning entity, organising to involve Australians in planning a better future for themselves and for future generations. Find out everything about ACFP and how to become involved at www.austcfp.com.au. ACFP acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as First Australians and recognises their culture, history, diversity and their abiding connection with the land. We pay our respects to Elders past, present and emerging and fully acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. The Australia Together podcast is recorded on the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. In February 2023, Australia's Treasurer Jim Chalmers released an essay on the economy called Capitalism After the Crises. A few months before that, he also expressed a desire to have a conversation with the Australian people about how we pay for the services that they need and deserve and have a right to expect. In this essay, ACFP's founder, Bronwyn replies to the Treasurer and offers some ideas about how Australians may participate in conversations with the government, not just about how they might pay for the services they deserve, but also how their values might influence the shape of Australia's next economy. This essay is being delivered in 4 parts. In Part 1, Bronwyn discusses Chalmers' commitment to hold conversations on the economy. She then looks at how Australians can chime in and suggests that there are 3 important conversations that should be established between the government and Australians at large if we are to succeed as a nation in building the sort of economy the government wants, one that promotes inclusion, equality and the values of Australians.
Australia may have just got lucky, or at least luckier, with the appointment of a Treasurer who thinks about well-being. It's a relief, after 40 years of the dominance of neoliberalism in Western economies, to hear a National Treasurer suggest that the well-being and values of the Australian people should shape their economy. This is what Australia's Treasurer Jim Chalmers has offered as a manifesto in the essay he published in the Monthly on the 1st of February 2023, Capitalism After the Crises. In this essay, he professed to understand the people's appetite for a more conscious sense of well-being after the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, and he argued for the need to put the values of Australians at the forefront of how our economies work. He said that if we fail to do that, we will leave behind reams of wasted talent, a degraded environment, and social dislocation, all of which threaten to diminish the productive capacity of our economies and ability to create value in the first place. The election of a Labor government in 2022 has lifted the lid on discussions about how the Australian economy may be reshaped so that it functions in the way the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said it should. He wants an economy that works for people, not the other way around. And a new willingness from this government to establish respectful conversations with stakeholders in the economy is evident from the swift completion of the Jobs and Skills Summit in 2022 and more than 100 round tables held prior to the summit in communities across the country. A willingness to listen, at least to major stakeholders, is clear. But how can we establish the parameters for a truly meaningful, more inclusive conversation between the government and Australians at large? How can more Australians participate in talks with this new, thoughtful Treasurer so that we make the most of this opportunity for discussion? How can we give ourselves the best chance to build the inclusive sort of economy the government says it wants? For his part, it would appear that Treasurer Jim Chalmers is up for different conversations with different stakeholders in the economy. He's up for a conversation with the Australian people about how we pay for the services he says that they need and deserve and have a right to expect. In other words, he's happy to involve Australians in a conversation about tax. We might infer from this that he wants to talk about whether we might pay more tax overall to cover the cost of our growing need for services, or perhaps scrap the Stage 3 tax cuts due in 2024 in the interest of equality and protection of our existing services. But based on his essay, it's apparent that when it comes to the business community, the focus of his preferred conversation is not about what either individuals or businesses pay in tax. It's about how businesses will spend public funds and where they will choose to direct their investments. The Treasurer is hoping to facilitate a conversation with business leaders to encourage them to direct their investments toward the public good, and so he is segmenting his audience. One conversation with Australians about tax, and another with business about the structure of the economy and the mix of markets within it. This is likely to limit the involvement of Australians in the wider-ranging conversation about their economy. It will limit the extent to which Australians and the government can work together to build a truly inclusive economy that works for people. Unless, of course, the people of Australia find a way to chime in on that wider conversation. In this 4-part essay responding to Jim Chalmers, I'll argue that if the government's objective is indeed an inclusive economy, one which increases participation, particularly of women, and draws on the talents of the whole population, then it will be very important to bring these two conversations together so that more Australians can participate in both. In his essay, the Treasurer has stated his working assumption that inclusion is a precondition for the robust economy Australians need. According to Chalmers, inclusion is something that makes our economy stronger, not just something we can pay for when the economy is growing. But as he is structuring the conversation at the moment, he risks giving too much weight to the economy as business would prefer it to be, and not enough to an economy in which Australians are the centre. If the intention is that Australians will become the purpose of their own economy, not the other way around, then we will need a more inclusive conversation, and we will need this on an ongoing basis. In general, governments are not inclined to bother Australians at large with conversations about the economy. On tax, maybe they're willing to talk. On the economy, not so much, if at all. Conversations about the economy are usually conducted in the halls of privilege between governments and powerful elites, not with everyday Australians. But this patronises Australians to a degree that is unnecessary in a wealthy, educated nation, and to a degree that is anomalous and even self-defeating if the objective is to build an economy that works for people. Instead of maximising participation, the political tactic of splitting the conversations and segmenting the audiences reduces the chances of building the sort of cooperation between people, businesses and governments that is necessary to achieve an economy that delivers what people want and need at all times, rather than just when it is growing. But it is possible to run these conversations together, and in order to help the government master that, we can start with a response to the Treasurer's essay, which covers how the most productive conversations can be organised. In the main, his essay is about how Australia can learn from the economic crises of recent decades, but there is other learning that can be offered in response. This is about how a thoughtful Treasurer can have truly respectful and meaningful conversations on an ongoing basis with the Australian people to establish and maintain an inclusive economy. So I'll begin by looking at how we can arrange that. In Capitalism After the Crises, Australia's Treasurer, Dr. Jim Chalmers, argues for a growth model of the economy that puts equality and equal opportunity at the centre, and he suggests we can achieve that through something he calls values-based capitalism. The essence of his argument is that in the 21st century, the world has faced three big crises: the global financial crisis of 2008, the COVID-19 pandemic, and now global inflation. But to date, as he says, we have not demonstrated that we have learned well from these crises. In Chalmers' view, successive leaders have failed to find their way conclusively or convincingly past the neoliberal form of capitalism, that form which promotes small government, less taxation, especially for the rich and for corporations, less public ownership or operation of assets and services, and less regulation of markets and impacts on the natural environment. Unambiguously, Chalmers has diagnosed neoliberalism as the cause of Australia's economic problems. And in effect, his solution is that we should reverse it by remaking capitalism into a human-centred economic system where partnerships between governments, labour and business support what he calls the for-purpose or social purpose economy. Chalmers sells this as the project of an unabashed optimist, convinced that we can and must build a better capitalism, one that he says is uniquely Australian, more confident and forward-thinking, more aligned with our values, based more on evidence and integrity, more capable of building resilience, not just building buffers. Essentially, this project might be described as a makeover of capitalism with a human face. And if we are to ensure that this makeover is not merely superficial, then it's certainly worth a conversation. If there is a genuine intent to build an inclusive economy that promotes equality, well-being and human values, but also offers businesses the thing they value, profit, then we should all clamour for the opportunity to participate in the conversation. That said, it's not all that evident in the Chalmers essay that Australians at large are to be invited into this conversation. The overwhelming impression is that this is to be a conversation between those who are already powerful in business, government and probably unions. Nor is it all that apparent that the makeover itself will be more than superficial. There is an optimism in the essay that neoliberal capitalism will be easily transformed into values-based capitalism without too much resistance from those who've benefited most from the neoliberal form. The direction is worthy and even inspiring, who after all would not wish for a form of capitalism that is socially oriented if such a thing were a realistic prospect. Chalmers certainly thinks the transformation he is proposing is realistic. He promotes it as optimism and realism, two defining characteristics of our people and of the best of their governments. It's great to see him standing up for this, but it must be said that to the extent his essay describes the means by which we might achieve this transformation, it is missing some things that are vital if the makeover is to be more than superficial and fully successful for Australians, business and the economy as a whole. Three of the biggest missing things will be discussed in this essay in reply to Dr. Chalmers. The first is the lack of any intent to engage in a conversation with Australians about what they actually value and what well-being means for them, an understanding of which is essential to any program to deliver the sort of well-being Australians want and need. The second is the lack of an intent to conduct a conversation with business about building a national competition policy, which actually fosters fair competition, an essential ingredient of a healthy economy, which works to deliver what people really value in the most cost-efficient way. And the third is the lack of an understanding about the need for a conversation with Australians about fairness in their economy, by which I mean fairness not just in taxation, but also in distribution of the national income and wealth that Australians work hard to generate. We need meaningful conversations about these three things, and Chalmers has at least opened the door. They are essential conversations if we wish to build a people-centred economy. This essay in reply to the Treasurer deals with how we might have them. I will speak first about conversations we should have about a values-based economy, then those we should have about a competitive economy, and finally, those we need about a fair economy.
That was part one of this talk in reply to Jim Chalmers' essay on capitalism after the crises. A link to the Chalmers essay is in descriptions below. For a full transcript of all 4 parts of Bronwyn's talk, visit www.austcfp.com.au/national-wellbeing-index. Or, if you're watching on YouTube, follow the links below. In part 2, Bronwyn will discuss how the government can have conversations with the Australian people about a values-based economy, one that works for people, not the other way around.